Welcome back to another episode of our Eagle Perspective podcast. I'm Mike Siciliano, Dean of Students of the Upper School. We are going to talk about the arts today. I am joined by our visual arts teacher, Miss Kalli Hendrickson. Kalli, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Am I right? This is your third year here with us at Santa
Yes.
Fe? Okay.
Yes.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of what you do here on campus? And then I'm also going to ask some questions in a bit about how you discovered that you were, in fact, an artist.
Oh my, yes.
But tell us about what you do here on campus.
Okay, so I am the Upper School's visual arts teacher. And so I teach Art 1, and then by rank all the way up to AP for our seniors. And I really love that process because being the one art teacher, you get to see how they grow over all years in school, and you know how to challenge them, and it's an ongoing relationship, which I feel like you don't get that in other areas. So it's
absolutely. Like, speaking as someone who used to teach AP US history, which I loved, but you get 1 year with them. And one thing that's unique about your role is you, in a lot of cases, get the same kids for 4 years, right? So you get freshmen, baby them, and, fully grown, mature adult them, or some version of that, right? At the end. What is that like to get to be a part of? And then plus, you also get all this time where, they're working on art, but, talking about deep, meaningful things, right?
Yeah.
So what's that like for you to get to be part of that and to see that over the course of 4 years?
It's kind of sweet because in Art 1, I tend to be a very strict personality. And then when they get me in advanced art, I get all these shifty eyes like, wait, what?
I'm allowed to just sit here and talk while I'm doing this?
Yeah. They get it's funny. And my personality then is a little bit sassy, and when they start catching those things or my facial expressions, it builds the relationship. It makes it calmer. But on the professional end, then I love the discipleship factor that goes with 4 years of a relationship, because by the time they're seniors, they come in with their life questions like, oh, I have to make this college decision.
Yeah.
What do you think about this avenue for me to pursue as a career? And those moments, they make it. Discipleship's an important thing, even though that word is kind of outdated. It's just you get to walk with somebody in what they love.
Yeah.
And what's more vulnerable than the arts? You get to see a whole side of their heart rather than just their facts and what they're learning.
Okay, so I was totally going to ask you more about your background, but I kind of, now that you've said that, what's more vulnerable than the arts? I feel like I have to segue a little bit to what is it about the arts that is so vulnerable? I mean, what is it that makes it so powerful? And we'll get into some how that hits our faith as well. But what makes you say that?
I once had this conversation because I worked as a part of the Youth with a Mission program for 7 years in Australia, and I ran a coffee shop for them, but then I also taught art classes on the side. And so in that art community, we had dancers, musicians, and artists, and they're like, how can I use my craft to change the world, basically, to impact people, to use my faith? What does that look like? So we had this conversation about what was more vulnerable, because in painting, it's a process. You're working through something and you're putting your heart and your ideas out there, and it's like a lasting prayer. It will stand, and you might shift before that painting loses its meaning.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a dancer or a musician, you are the vulnerable. You stand up there and it's your voice that everybody's looking at, or your body that everyone's looking at. And so there is a lot of vulnerability in just showing your thoughts and your heart, but the way that you do it is its own ranking, I think.
Yeah, I'm struck by what you say of the visual arts. You paint something or you make something, and it's there forever. Yeah. You may not even agree with the thing that you painted 10 years from now, but it is a marker of a moment in time that lasts forever, right? That is really vulnerable. Okay, you mentioned the coffee shop, so just because I know a little bit about this story, I'll start by saying, tell me when it was you knew that arts were your thing.
I always was itching to draw things, even as a kid. My dad and I have this beautiful sense of humor, and part of our relationship was whenever we went out to dinner, we'd draw on napkins, little like stories at restaurants, and the little crayons that they leave on the table, I would always be using those. But it evolved into, like, I played sports in high school, and there was a huge change in that, and I ended up choosing art because I had no safe avenue, basically, to process my heart other than through what I was creating, which is, I think, is kind of a classic artist story, but that was true for me. And then when I chose to make it my career, I remember I was on campus as a college student, and I had drifted into, I don't know what I want to do with my life land.
As many college students do,
Because my first professor, after a critique, told me I didn't have what it takes.
To be an artist.
I didn't have what it takes to be an artist.
Wow, okay.
And so I thought, oh my gosh, what? I love this. This is terrible. And I thought, well, I really want to help people. Maybe I'll pursue that instead. So I dabbled in psychology, and I realized that I wasn't an intense thinker in that way. Like, man, if somebody has a problem, I kind of want to cheer them up, or I don't want to remain in it with them.
You don't want to force them to deal with their demons or something psychological, right? Like, you want to be like, let's paint something and feel better.
Let's make it pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was frustrated and like on a deadline, and I was walking through our campus towards our creative arts building on this day. And I had one of those raise your fist at the sky moments towards the Lord, even though I wasn't like in a tight relationship with God at that point in my life. I said to him, I was like, if you let me back into the art program because it's what I love, I will figure out how to use it to help people. And so I marched down into the dean's building, basically, and got this meeting and asked to be let back into the art program. And the dean sat there with this intimidating face, and he was like, you flaked on us once. Why should I let you back in?
Wow. Yeah.
I had this bold moment where I don't even know what came out of my mouth, but it was basically like, this is what I live and breathe. This is what is the most beautiful thing about myself, I think. And I have this hunger to touch the world with what I do. So I will stick this out. I don't care what your faculty thinks about me.
Awesome.
And he let me back in, and I just stuck it out. I was one of the first people in that school to do their thesis in caustic painting, which is with wax. And so I was kind of a little trailblazer after that, too. And so every time I go to an art show in Montana and I see that someone from MSU did encaustics, I'm like, ooh.
That's the tradition that you started. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that was fun and part of my creative journey.
Yeah. Have you seen the professor since?
I still email the ceramics department here and there because that guy is cool. And he's now the dean, I think, of the school.
Did you ever get the, like, I was wrong moment, or is that something you just had to let go?
I did not. That guy still works there, and I see his artwork up and around, and I'm like,
Oh, well, okay. So you have chosen to make art your career, your profession, right? And I'll just brag about you for a sec. You do it amazingly well, not just from all the ways that you draw art out of our kids, but the little culture you've kind of built in your classroom and all the kids that go in there at lunch, and that you're their person, right? Which is really neat to see. Most of them probably will not have a career in the arts. Is that fair to say? Not that we won't have some. Of course we will, and we do. But most of them probably will not.
Yeah. Well, we talk about this, actually.
Okay.
I'm very strategic with my seniors. They have to read a few books in AP. And in it, I'm flat out say, like, you have to have a work ethic. Mm-hmm. You have to have something that will wake up and commit you to your work time, even if you don't feel like it. Because if you're going to go on the fields, you're never going to make it in this trade. And if you can't meet your deadlines, you're never going to make it in this trade. So I'm pretty straightforward in holding those lines throughout art, actually. But they know, and so their process and the way that they do art and the way that they think, I try to kind of build in those things.
Right.
And what was cute is this summer, I had a coffee with a former student, and she said to me, Miss Hendrickson, I never thought that all of those mind maps were going to matter, but I got to college and I was like, I know how to do this.
Oh, that's
and I was
awesome.
like, vindication.
The best feeling. That is the best feeling, right? When kids come back and they're
Yeah.
like, this thing you told me mattered. Actually, maybe it did matter just a little bit. Okay, but that said, for the ones that don't go into art as a profession, what is the value of having been through your program? Like, why is arts
great.
important for those of us that art is not our profession?
Yeah. Well, I love to pull this story out of a hat, but basically, I know a lot from my business background about why people are being hired right now. And I read this study by General Electric that was done in like 2010, something-ish like that. And basically, the number one hireable trait in the world is creatives. We need innovative thinkers, people who can come up with ideas that haven't existed before. And it makes sense given our technology and even, I mean, the pandemic, how many new ideas were needed.
Right. Yeah, a lot.
So teaching resiliency and teaching how do you have original ideas is part of the process in the arts as well. And so if in Art 1, you only ever take that class, there is one project in it where I make my students come up with 25 ideas for eggs. And
Like uses for, like things you could do with eggs.
yeah.
Okay.
And they could do pun things. They could I don't
But
know,
like,
terrible at
okay, so
puns.
this is my cheekiness, but like, is eat them only one, or if I eat them in 12 different ways, does that count as 12 ideas in
This
your project?
is a common question that I
Okay.
get asked.
Yeah.
And
Probably
so-
by the most annoying of students, which I would have been for sure in your class.
Well, you know, it's cheekiness that I find much affection in. So if it's puns or if it's I'm going to dress the egg up like a clown 5 different ways
Okay.
or waffles scrambled.
Right.
Like 20 ideas. By the time you hit 15, you're going to start running out of ideas.
Yeah, right.
And so then I tell students, even when I give the assignment, I'm like, there's a ratio of original ideas that I will look at compared to all the classes and all the students that
So
do
if you
this.
pick the 25 most common uses of eggs, it's kind of like meh.
You're going to have
Yeah.
probably 2 out of 20
Yeah.
as your ratio. But
Yeah.
if you are like, you know what, I'm really going to try with this and just see.
Yeah.
Usually the average creative is around 8 original ideas. But if
Yeah.
you have an exceptional gifting for innovative thinking, you can get into the 10 to 12 range. And
Yeah.
I've only seen that with a couple of students. So,
What are some of the most innovative things kids have come up with on the
well,
egg
I did
challenge?
see, this one stands out to me because it was colored too, but there was a superhero egg man with an egg firing gun.
So one superhero with 24 egg bullets.
They did other things too.
Okay. All right.
But it was well done
Yeah.
and really, really imaginative
Yeah,
for sure.
that's awesome. That is creative. I wouldn't have come up with that one.
Yeah.
So that's good. You mentioned the coffee shop earlier, so I'm gonna ask you to share that story because you just also talked about kind of your business background and
Yeah.
innovation.
Okay.
Tell us about that experience and why it was so important to you.
Yeah. Well, I also noticed in my time in Australia that creatives in modern day context tend to go for the coffee realm too. Baristas is their first job out of the gates, most likely. And it's particularly where we were, it was an area where families were just hard times, and kids would go to school and not necessarily have food. It wasn't safe places to go home. And I kept looking around me at how I had this school of amazing Christian people who were not connected in their community, really. And so the leadership team had this idea of a coffee shop, and I had many years of experience with running coffee shops, and it was just a natural in, basically. So we opened a coffee shop, and through it, then I started to notice that like all the creative people would come to it, and like training them up in a skill where they could have business skills no matter what country they went into, influence in the community because of the relationships they were creating. It eventually evolved to even then giving them license to show their work. We had this thing called the Blue Door Project, where artists who worked the coffee shop could pair with community writers, like poets.
Yeah.
And we did a little zine out of it.
That's
so like
cool.
Painters and photographers then paired with actual Australian creatives, because we were international, so the people that worked it were from any country in the world, which is itself very interesting because different countries have different focuses on what beauty is. So yeah, that turned out to be a great partnership with the community and with artists, and a way for the staff to get money to keep working and staying in the country, and it was just great. So that was my coffee background.
kind of this merging of passion, entrepreneurship, creativity, right? All in one spot, which is pretty neat. I want to shift a little bit to the role of the visual arts in faith. And, which is obviously something you're integrating in your class. And if we look through history, right, and we look at the role of art in change and in movements and whatnot. And we have this book here. It's called For the Beauty of the Church, which I think, did you know this before Rod Gilbert, our head of schools, or did he give you this book?
He gave me the book, but I will pat myself on the shoulder that there is something quoted in the book from another book that I did read. So I was like a shoe step away.
Which, if you're a shoe step away from one of Rod's books, you're on the right track. That's what I've learned
good about my life.
in working for him. So what is it? Let's just start with the basic. Why is art so important, or what role does art play in our world of faith?
There is an author, Russian author, whose famous quote is, "Beauty will save the world." And it basically is the artist's role and responsibility with their faith. And even in the Bible, like the first person to help Moses with the tabernacle, they needed a creative. They needed a craftsman to do that. Moses couldn't do it himself. So it tends to be that artists stand between a curb in culture. They tend to be the voice of change in societies. And we see that with film today, or graphic design or digital art especially. But in even looking back historically, if you think about World War II, the propaganda stuff, the German expressionistic movement was all about, wow, you know what, the world really sucks right now. Hope is gone, and we are going to stop creating for this better thing because it doesn't exist. And so art completely changed, and people became in the deconstruction era. Like, it's all about me, and art became this dark thing rather than a light. And so it's been something that I have been thinking about quite regularly, is if we as artists are the culture curbers, how do we handle that and have a good relationship with creativity, a healthy relationship with creativity? How do we make sure that our hearts are open to listening to whatever Holy Spirit wants to bring in? How do we feed the well of creativity that is out there in the world? How do I teach my students how to do that? Because otherwise, all we're ever doing is releasing, like, hopelessness around us rather than new ideas or possibilities or hope.
Or even just commentary on, the current state of media or film or whatnot. Like, I feel like in the church there's a lot of sort of lamenting those things. Yeah. But what you're sort of saying, and honestly, the point that the book makes too, is like, we need believers in these spaces to project hope and beauty that reflects who God is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is so true.
So I know you recently went to a conference, right? And there's a story there that you've shared a little bit, but I'd love to have you share it with everyone who's listening.
Yeah. it was beautiful to be in a room full of people that have asked that question, like, we are responsible, and in our crafts, we're just going to do the best that we can, basically. And this one professor got up who had been talking about his own journey with, like, the responsibility of creating hope in the world through what he creates. And it turns out that he had been like a professor of psychology before he even grad schooled his life. And he chose ceramics in the end, which is a very close place to my heart. So I was already on board the minute that he got up there. But he was sharing how in society, basically, the Western philosophy is beauty has to be this big, grandiose, gorgeous thing. And side note off of that, if you see something beautiful, today's response is to pull out your cell phone and try to capture it rather than like, oh my gosh, let it move your heart, soak it in to your mind, and just be present.
Right.
So, yeah, he was talking about how in Italy, basically, all their pride as a culture is in those Renaissance artworks, the churches with the gold-rimmed designs and Michelangelo ceilings and wispiness. But he started to grapple with, that's a lot of work in Western society.
It took Michelangelo years to paint that ceiling, right?
Yeah. And so what is another philosophy out there? And so he looked at Japanese culture, and there's this whole form of pottery, basically, where they take everyday normal objects, and if they break, they fuse them back together with gold. It's beautiful. But there's a particular tea bowl that is the oldest thing in Japanese culture and the thing that they're the most proud of. It's a tea bowl. It's not the most attractive thing that you're ever going to lay eyes on. The rims isn't straight. It's made out of dirt that is not even glazed well. Like, it just kind of thrown together thing. It doesn't balance on the table. It's rickety.
Yeah.
But Japanese culture is like, that is everyday normal beauty. And so this inspired this guy to think, actually, you know what, if I want to be an influence, I'm going to make a coffee cup.
I love that.
Because it is something that you use every day. I mean, your coffee cup says something about you. Mine says something about me. And it's a sneaky way to just be a touch point of beauty.
Right.
And so then he compared that to Jesus. Jesus wasn't an attractive person, but he was what he needed to be to touch every area of society.
Yeah.
And I just loved that, because everybody's creativity is different. Everybody's voice is different. But Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote A Wrinkle in Time, she also has this quote about creativity that all you can do is your job and feed the lake of ideas, because you never know if your thing is going to hit one person that is the next Michelangelo.
Sure. Or
you just don't know the impact.
Well, even some of those artists, right, that it's like only after they've passed have their works become, really famous. I love that philosophy though of and it feels very biblical of see the beauty in the everyday and not just the big and grandiose. And I don't know why I also think about Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade and like the mug, right? Yeah. But that's just me. You mentioned the coffee cups. I feel bound to talk about the coffee cups because like this mug now is a thing, and it's not that I think I'm the top gun. It's actually that marketing just gave me this cup, and now it's a thing, and I have to keep it. So just to be clear on that, I'm not that arrogant. But let's look at what does yours say?
Adventure is out there, and it's got some mountains on there.
Okay, and that's your mug.
That is my mug.
Okay, so why that one?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, okay, so I'm from Montana originally, and let's be honest, in Montana, those mountains are a thing. They're your heart and soul. And I honestly think that there is some kind of blessing over Montana for creatives. People go there to heal, or they become like singer-songwriters.
Yeah.
It's not that they stay, but it has this thing about it. The heights do that for you. So to me, it's a reminder for myself to remain healthy by pursuing adventures. And everyone I've ever taken has turned out well. So
Yeah.
think about it. I mean, I moved here just before the pandemic.
Right.
It's turned out well.
Welcome. Welcome. I thought you were going to say it's because your favorite movie is Up.
Oh, that would be cute.
And I can't not watch that movie, and like I can't watch that movie and not cry in the first 10 minutes.
Oh my gosh,
like
I know.
it is like the most devastating. Speaking of powerful art, but
Yeah, true.
A couple more questions. So you also have a really unique worship background involving art. Could you share a little bit about that experience?
Well, so in my time in Australia, leading that coffee shop and teaching art classes, we had a tradition of going and serving during the Easter break, this music festival. And it had all different types of artists, usually Christian artists. So we had Switchfoot come, and John Mark McMillan, and Hillsong came. And so basically my artists were drafted to help this festival with some live art activities. And so that snowballed, and I found myself standing on a stage of like 4,000 people looking up at me and painting this.
No pressure.
I know, right? It was a door, basically, because we had put doors all over. That was part of our live art exhibit. And then in the main main worship band, main moment, here I am on a stage painting in front of many people. And I did that quite a bit, actually, many moments of painting in worship. And I loved it because it was a place to stand between God's heart and the people that came to encounter him.
Yeah.
And in art, we call that transcendence. It's creating something that helps people connect with something better than themselves. So I did that, and like every time I got a color or a picture or an object in my head, I would paint that, and then the song would change, and it would be something about that thing that I just painted.
Oh, man.
And then my favorite end of that story was that particular time I came off the stage, and a little later, this old lady came up to me who was like, "Hey, I can't believe that you painted this angel in this painting." And I was like, "What?
What angel are you referring to?"
And so she's like, "No, like here." And I looked at it and I was like, oh, it does look like that. That's so weird.
It's amazing.
So I started noticing that in my desire to stand between the Lord and people with my art and listen, I noticed that he sneaks his way in there.
That's awesome. I love that so much. That's great.
Yeah, and I see it in my students too. Like they'll hand something in and I'll be like, "Oh, did you know?" Like every now and then I'll point that out. It's beautiful.
Yeah. Okay, one more question.
Okay.
Here on campus, what are some ways in which your kids get to practice this?
Well, we do a few different things throughout the year, but most recently we did a wall mural. Mm-hmm. And there's a new building project on campus. Basically, it was a white wall, and it was just very boring.
I'll add a little context. We normally have this beautiful quad with a lot of green space, and it's kind of like the hangout spot.
Yeah.
And because of the construction this year, it's gone, and there was this big giant white wall blocking our typically beautiful view.
Yeah. And I will say it's the biggest wall mural I've ever participated in.
It's pretty big.
It's a pretty long one.
I think originally it was like, it'll be done in 2 days.
Oh my goodness.
More like 2 weeks, am I right on that?
It was 2 weeks,
But it turned out great.
Well, yeah, and I'm just grateful because we had a lot of blending. I mean, the lower school students got to come up and paint seashells. Middle schoolers did like the sand on it. My freshmen did the sunset. And it was just so much fun to see like every aspect of the school come together to create this thing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because we pitched a lot of ideas in the beginning, but found that something that would serve our community the best and would be like a relaxing way to bring back a little of the nature aspect was to do like a beachscape. So it served the community and it wasn't about the artist. It wasn't and I think that's important to teach kids is art actually serves. It is not always about you and your idea getting shown. And sometimes it is, and that's a blessing. But oftentimes in the real world, when you get hired to do an art project, you're commissioned to do someone else's work.
Yeah.
So as a chance to paint a wall mural, I told them, I said this kind of cheeky in my younger kid classes, like, if you mess this up, we will not have another opportunity. You have the potential to open a lot of doors with this. We're here to serve, so don't be a diva.
Yeah. I love it. Listen, I work with teenagers all the time. They need don't be a diva sometimes. That's good.
Yeah.
It's healthy.
Yeah, and so now I've got so many compliments on that thing, and it's beautiful because it wasn't any of us, but it evolved to be something that is communal, and that's the best kind of artwork.
and just, as a person who struggles artistically, that's not a gifting but that I have, but it's made that space nice again and kind of fun again and feeling like it used to feel, even though before for a while there was just this big boring white wall and it wasn't a good feeling. You guys rescued that space, so thank you.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Kalli, for joining us today and just sharing your heart and your story. You have such an amazing background. We are really blessed to have you. And I said the same thing when we had Matt Corsaro on, but I know for a lot of our kids on campus, you have created a home for them. Like, you are the space where they feel safe, where when they have free time, they want to go and just hang out. And you've really become such a mentor to them. So thank you for what you do here.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of our Eagle Perspective podcast. You can always catch more of our episodes on Apple Music or Spotify or other places where podcasts are found. We also now do have a video podcast, so search for us on YouTube. We will be back with another episode soon, and thank you again for joining us.